Hello, everyone. Startup and ICT ecosystem delegate, I would say, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all from Kigali, Rwanda. On behalf of Smart Africa Alliance, it is my great pleasure to participate in this opening session of this digital assembly organized by the Innovation for Policy Foundation. That comes right after a virtual workshop we hosted this morning as we move forward on our work on Startup Act and the ICT ecosystem, flagship project championed by Republic of Tunisia within Smart Africa. As you're all aware, the Smart Africa blueprint on startup and ICT ecosystem is the fruit of collaborations between the government and our member state, the private sector, the regulators, international organizations, rallying across the common purpose of seizing the momentum for Startup Act in Africa. To date, there are still many factors that hinder the progress of startups and ICT ecosystem in Africa. But it gives me much pride to see the giant stride that have been made collectively up to this point. And indeed, there is no better time now to push further our common objective to see them thrive. That being said, the coronavirus outbreak has already had a strong negative impact on the African entrepreneurs. On the survey report shared by the Innovation for Policy Foundation, of which details you will see certainly during this digital assembly, the results are compelling. About 44% of the 531 enterprises surveyed are at risk of failure, while 40% have just enough operating capital to sustain themselves for the next 3 months. Close to 90% of them require capital support at this point. As a response to this impact, COVID-19 pandemic is having on startups, we sent a response package to member states in order to engage them into treating the startup and ICT ecosystem as the key priorities for support. We recommended a financial relief in the form of a tax adjustment, direct financial support through monthly lump sum transfers, and the adoption of the bottom-up approach with the African Startup Relevance Solution. The Secretariat has also launched a call for project targeted at African startup companies for a technology platform to support our member states in identifying, tracking, and containing the COVID-19 patients with adaptability to suit a different technological and socio-economic diversity across the continent. Out of the 307 respondents, 72% were from African countries, 46% were ICT, small and medium enterprises, and 29% were startups. Allow me here to use this opportunity to congratulate all the startups here that have repurposed their assets to offer solutions for containing the pandemic. Thank you all for being part of this great cause of our continent. We have witnessed how African startup and ICT ecosystem have mobilized and expressed unprecedented resiliency and creativity throughout the coronavirus pandemic outbreak and the subsequent crises, such as economic crisis to come, or as an outcome of the pandemic. We are continuing our work to mobilize member states in response to allow for the creation of the best possible condition for them to thrive through Startup Act. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participant, Smart Africa, it is not in the business of reinventing the wheel, which is the reason why we have worked with a cross section of stakeholders on this project, including the Innovation for policy foundation. The value proposition here we bring into this is the pragmatism by way of introducing projects that member country can pick from and implement. It is the purpose of Smart Africa Startup Blueprint document that brings together the experience of the Tunisian Startup Act and other African countries such as Senegal and Mali, as well as the countries outside the continent such as China, Estonia, and Israel. In parallel to this work we do with members country, we have launched a survey on African startup and ICT ecosystem actors in order to promote them to decision makers in the public and the private sector across the continent. I urge you all to be part of this survey and continue to provide valuable insight. Smart Africa is committed and will remain committed to act as a catalyzer for the social economic development of Africa by supporting the valuable work of startups and ICT ecosystem in the continent. We are convinced that the rise of African startup participates substantially in building a bright future for Africa and the expansion of our horizon, of its creative youth. I wish you a successful Digital Assembly Day, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Executive Director Kone. We really join us for the opening session of this Pan-African Digital Assembly, a first of its kind event to bring together entrepreneurs and ordinary people, policymakers, leading thinkers from across the continent to co-create solutions for this coronavirus pandemic, looking at response and recovery. It's been really fantastic to have you with us. I think that we're going to be taking a moment to gather some questions from the audience that is joining us live on Facebook. In the meantime, I would like to ask you, I know that Smart Africa has put out a call for proposals, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. I would just like to know if you could offer us a preview of any of the next steps that you're exploring in terms of supporting the member countries of Smart Africa in terms of response.
Yeah, thank you very much. Out of the 307, we went through 5 different phases to do shortlisting. In the beginning, we went from 307 participants to 94, and from 94, we shortlisted again based on certain sets of criteria. One of the most used criteria, it has to be hosted in Africa. And because we want to protect personal data, we want to actually comply to personal data protection. And one of the key features also we were looking at, it is the context of Africa, because when we talk about a digital platform, you have to know that not everyone in Africa owns a smartphone. So be able to do, be able to assess patients using USSD is very important, because a USSD out of probably 460 million subscriber for cell phone in general, there's about 250 smartphones. So you have actually about 200 million users which do not have a smartphone. So it's quite important. We want it to be inclusive. These are some of the criteria we look into it. So we are down from 307 to 94, 94 to 28 shortlists. From 28, we shortlisted to 6, and shortlisted from 6 to 5. Right now, we have about 3 top lists, but in addition, an exercise we need to do, we reach out the day before yesterday to the Extraordinary ICT Council of Ministers of Smart Africa, where we had presented our finding to be able to give us a green light to go ahead to the next step. They've asked us a few things to do on the top of what we have already, because when we actually launched a call for project back in March 25th, no one had the solution. No country has a solution for the COVID-19 platform. Everyone was actually struggling and fighting really hard. Every startup in their own country, they were actually putting up solutions. So they've asked us to do an extra thing, which is to go back now to look at those countries and the solution being adopted in those countries, and be able to do cross-reference with the list that we have and come back to them with that result. Because the time we started, there was nobody. The time we were doing evaluations of all these 307 people, some startup did some good job in a different country. So we need to go back with that list and to do a comparison and cross-reference with our results in order to proceed.
That is fantastic. Thank you very much, Lacina. We just shared the survey for Smart Africa survey that should be going up into the Facebook Live chats, and we're going to be sharing that also on our i4Policy social media so that everybody can hopefully fill that out and get you this information that you need to be able to craft this response and recovery solutions. You mentioned during your remarks the fantastic working group that I had the honor to attend just before this keynote address. Where you brought together ministries of digital economy and ICT from across the continent, as well as some leading experts. I think one question that we've had as we engage in policy reform discussions is how do we balance this sort of, I guess the regulatory reform efforts, the sort of improvement of regulatory environments, the improvement of capital flows at this time of pandemic. And if you have any advice or thoughts on, in a way, the phasing of these policy reform conversations, because in many cases we find that the policy conversations have been really put on hold while governments are responding to the crisis. We really appreciate your thoughts on this.
Very interesting. I was on a call with the, as you know, the chair and the co-chair of the steering committee of Smart Africa. They are the ITU and AU. I reach out to them individually, the Secretary General of ITU, as well as the Dr. Mani, the Commissioner for Infrastructure, Energy, and ICT in African Union. We were talking about this. This crisis, what we are seeing is, first of all, is an opportunity for ICT sector, because this is what we've been advocating a long time ago when we talk about digital transformation. And even we in Smart Africa, when you look at our theme, what we say connect, innovate, transform. Connections, which is infrastructure, innovation, which is entrepreneurship. We can't do transform unless you are connected and you innovate. But one thing we've been saying, since the beginning of the crisis is the fact that the priority are given to, of course, the humanitarian reason. We understand that. Health-wise, a lot of funds is being mobilized at the African continent level, even around the world. But the priority is given really to the healthcare system, which is completely normal. And also in Africa, and African particularity, a lot of attention is being given to food distribution and so on and so forth, humanitarian-wise. That's absolutely true. But let's not forget something. That was the causes of my conversation with the chair and co-chair of the steering committee. Is we have to be giving these funds have to be given a lot of importance to technology, because today some countries are going to be deconfined. When you talk about confine and deconfine, you're talking social distancing. There is nothing, no tool better in the world than adopting ICT at the center of our activity for social distancing. But this is the awareness, and these are the recommendations. This is what we need to be urging different stakeholders, bilateral donors, or investors at this moment, at this crisis moment, to know that, ICT is quite important. We need to be putting technology at the center. But I must say that, for the past 4 weeks, that has not really been the case. The ICT has been seen, well, it's just a tool to be able to assist the crisis, the team put out together by the government between the health department, different ministry department. It's a tool just to help out. They're just looking at a tool in terms of patient assessment, but they're not looking at it today. Countries who succeeded during this crisis time, you can count them. I would say Estonia. Why? Because close to 100% of the Estonian services are digital online. It means people are locked down in their houses. They still have access to government services. Then the fundamental question we need to ask ourselves, how many countries in Africa we can count today that has public services online, that people can remain at home doing teleworking, teleeducation, and still having government services online? That brings out the importance of technology in our discussion, and in the importance of startup and the importance of the incubators, accelerators, all of these is important. Because we know connectivity is one thing on the top of that, but we need to have the innovation. The heart of the innovation are our entrepreneurs and startup in Africa. That's what I have to say.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think this point is really important that, this crisis has actually in a way heightened our inequality through the digital divide. If you're connected to the internet, you can find resources, whether that's government services or otherwise, to continue education through online education, through teleworking. And of course, those that don't have access to the internet are really completely left behind in this regard and really excluded from economic activity, particularly under the more severe lockdown situations. Do you have any thoughts in terms of intermediary actions that could be taken by governments in this respect to be able to expand access? Are you aware of any initiatives that have been undertaken by member states of the Smart Africa community?
Yeah, sure. We've actually put out a COVID response pack, which are a set of recommendations to our member country. We actually post it on our social media, and we also share it with the ITU that actually is also sharing with his own community. This was based on a mini consultation we had as a Smart Africa. We are part of Broadband Commission response team for COVID. So there were a set of recommendations concerning connectivity. For example, we had a direct recommendation to the regulators in Africa to ease up laws and regulation in terms of a broadband deployment. For example, we do have a traditional FTTH, fiber to the home people. We do also have an ISP who were willing to give access to the population using fiber in the air, which is fiber on the line post, where some of these regulation and workload were delayed because of the bureaucracy. So most of these have been going on. One thing, and also to do frequency farming in order to identify frequencies that can be used quickly for IoTs, because think of it, the IoT, by having some wristband, some of the vendors are out there, they're able to monitor patients from distance, or even helping also healthcare workers who are facing the pandemic to do their job better. So there are sets of regulation in terms of even zero in for the recommendation with a zero in the cost of the internet for educational purposes, or the cost of internet for even mobile money services. So there's a set of regulation that we send out there. I'll be more than happy to share with you. If you go to our social media network, you can certainly find all this information. It goes from the government on the e-government side. It goes to the regulation. It goes to the financial industry, fintech. It goes even to the startup as well, what needs to be done in terms of the startup. It even goes to the food protections. So there are sets, it's the pack of recommendation we set out there for our member countries.
That's fantastic, and I can say our team has reviewed this document, and it really is quite comprehensive. We will be sharing this after the discussion on social media, and we're also going to be incorporating the recommendations from Smart Africa into the online forum. So the Pan-African Digital Assembly is actually accompanied by an online consultation, a forum, where participants for the conversations can go and actually, make their own proposals of sort of whether it's a policy reform for governments that they have in mind, or, a proposal for the international community, or even a proposal for the business community. The idea really to leverage the collective intelligence of the startup and entrepreneurial community across the continent to be involved in this solution making. So we are absolutely going to incorporate these wonderful proposals from Smart Africa Secretariat into that online forum. And we will be we'll be creating an opportunity as well for the members of the community to follow up with you. I was just informed that members that are watching this both live but also afterwards, if you have additional questions, you can send those and address those to Smart Africa directly at startups. And please, so it's startups@smartafrica.org. so that there's questions after the session directly to the team at Smart Africa Secretariat. And if you're joining us live right now on the Facebook Live, you can also write your questions there. And I'm starting to get some questions coming in from our community. So one of the questions is related to your background coming in from the private sector. I think it's quite important for people to recognize that you spent 25 years in the private sector in the telecommunications industry, and then you went into advising national governments, of course, in Côte d'Ivoire, and now you're in a position of working together with national governments and leadership across the continent to really set the agenda. And I think there's a curiosity about what you feel like that private sector experience brings into this work that you have, this quite important task that you have in front of you.
Yeah, the private sector experience is really the pragmatism. Very important. I believe that the difference between what we do and what other people do, it is we go straight to the point, but we actually manage politics and stakeholders management and execution of projects. So the experience from the private sector is really, that is helping me a lot here, is being very pragmatic and to be asking a lot of questions, why, and finding a solution, pragmatic solution to go around it and actually do it. Because a lot of times, each government in Africa, they have a very good intention to do something. But because the government, everything is a priority on the government level. So you need to know exactly how you maneuver and bring the importance of ICT into the middle of all this. And that's what really the private sector, going from Intelsat to Booz Allen and Hamilton and so on and so forth. I think that's what it helped me to do it.
I love that. In the design thinking rhetoric that we often use in the Innovation Hub community across the continent, and I learned this from a dear friend, Marcos Lema from ISADIS, who's a member of the Pan-African, the African Innovation Policy Task Force, together with Hannah it's a member of the Smart Africa team, of course. And he called it the 5 whys. So you constantly ask the question why. When you encounter a problem, you continue asking the question why until you really reach the bottom and understand really what the root cause is, to start really addressing it at its roots rather than at its branches. So that's really great. I hope that the members of our innovation community can feel strengthened by the fact that you're using such relatable problem-solving techniques. So I have a question coming in from Facebook. So forgive me if I don't ask this perfectly. So the question is, how do you intend to identify the entrepreneurs who can work online in the support of countries? So that's basically so they can work basically in supporting the objectives. How do you intend to identify the entrepreneurs that you're going to work with? And I think I assume that's in the context of the call for proposals, but also more broadly in the general work of Smart Africa mission.
That's actually very interesting, because how do we intend to identify entrepreneur online? We went from 307 proposal to 5 to a half dozen proposal. How did we do that? Because the way we went through the phases is basically a very tricky way, because from 94, when we got to 307 to 94, we asked people to send us a link of the demo of the platform they're developing. So if you think you're going to start from scratch, here we are COVID-19 time. Time is of essence. So there must be some prior investment in time that you have done. So when you send us a link, that's one thing. We go through the link. Then at the phase number 5, we call each one of them live demonstration of the platform you have. It's all being done online. So it's not like, we letting people, entrepreneurs, do their own thing and just dump it. No. So we wanted to be very pragmatic. First, send us a link. Before we even looked your technical proposal, your presentation, your project plan, we said, send us a link. We want to look at it. Then we'll look at your project plan. Then we call you on the one-to-one, do the demonstrations. It means you must have been ready at least by 70 to 75% of the project. That's how we did it.
Okay, so the best time to plant a tree was 5 years ago, basically.
Well, you see, it's very tricky. It talks about assessments. Look, it's really input, output, and the process. Front end, back end, and the brain. The front end, we know what it is, assessment. So assessment is, well, in the tech jargon and the startup jargon, is very easy to collect. Then you have, the interoperability with the external, with the existing system, with the different system and API, so which is quite known. The really big part of it is really the analytical part of the big data, the back end. How do you process these data? How do you integrate other elements? Because we talk about contact tracing is one thing. We talk about close contact tracing is another thing. And you need to balance between personal data protections and the technology. Technology can do anything, but is it allowable? In Africa, we do not have a GDPR. We do have a Malabo Convention, which has a 15, 16 signatory with only 6 countries ratified. How do you balance that? So all of these, you need to think about it. So I believe that a startup must have, it's not like you had to be ready if people knew that Corona was coming 5 years ago, come on, the whole world would be ready. But this is also a time to test the layers of our startup to see how fast they can be. Time was at a sense.
I love that. And I have to say, this is a good opportunity for us to also recognize that our I4Policy team has organized this event. And I would say that 5% of the way ready when the coronavirus pandemic struck us, but we decided to proceed not when we were ready, but when we were ready enough to be able to organize this conversation, because the insights that you're offering to the community, I think, are really important for everyone to be able to hear. When you talk about these questions around, balancing essentially public welfare and health,
yes,
directly questions around personal, privacy and data security. These are really fundamental questions of, some might call them human rights, some might call them individual liberty, but these are really fundamental questions for a society to discuss. And of course, this is a sovereign issue for states to discuss. So do you have how do you see the international, the regional collaboration on these points? And do you have any sort of, to be able to share in terms of how you see that process being able to proceed?
In fact, I like these questions, the question that you just asked, because when we talk about the personal data protections and personal data violations, what is it about? It's about contact tracing. But step back a little bit and look at the contact tracing. What are you tracing? I'm tracing an infected person. That's one thing. The second thing, I am tracing close contact, which is different. Any app developer, they can do it based on the GPS, based on location services, you can know where the person is, right? Now, the close contact tracing, if you're in the world like Africa, even in Europe or in America, the close contact tracing can only be done with the big data, which is owned by the telco. Then, if you step back a little bit, big data owned by telco, not every country around the world have a law to be able to collect the CDR, which is the big data, and put analytical tool to know exactly who was close to you by the location of the BTSs. I'm talking about location update table. If you know what I'm talking about. You can collect this kind of data with every 3 seconds, the cell phone sends a tower, I am here. This kind of data goes to the telco, and telco, they can build intelligence out of it. That is a violation of that's a violation of privacy law. So we, as a technology, in the technology sector, what do you do about that? How do you balance? That's how, when they said Close contact tracing. What are you tracing? I want to trace the device that is infected, or I want to trace where the person is. It's two different things. If I want to trace the device, I want to inform the device that that device was close to an infected person. Then you will use Bluetooth technology that Apple and Google are leading these days by coming up with an interoperable universal Bluetooth to be able to talk to each other. Then I am not violating personal information, and there's no violation because I only want to know the device that was close to the disease source. Then if I want to know the location of that device, then at this moment, I am actually violating a human right, I can say. It's a violation of personal data protection. So location, close contact tracing using a Bluetooth can only give identification of the device that was close to the source of the disease. However, identification of location of that disease then can go into the matter of a privacy law. That's how we balance it. And that's how I see it.
And how do you see this, particularly for the governments that don't have privacy laws in place?
Well, we have that situations in Africa here, and it is quite an issue because at this point of time, I think you saw in our presentations, majority of African country, out of the 55 country, I think you have close 54, 55 country, you have close to about 30 that has already personal data protection law. Somehow, it might not be accentuated like or articulated that we really wanted, like a Malabo Convention, so on and so forth. In fact, that's one of the reasons that Smart Africa has a working group in place looking after, led by Senegal in Smart Africa, looking into how to have a GDPR, like I think you and I, we talked about that when, well, last time when we were in the EU task force in Brussels. So this is one of the things we're looking into it for people to come on board. But, you know, country definition is really differ. The level of progress in each country differ. For example, Rwanda is very well developed. South Africa is very well developed. Kenya is very well developed. You go to Cote d'Ivoire is very well developed. Senegal is very well developed. If you go to other countries, you know, you might see some of it, but it may not really be articulated that we really want it. But they all, you know, most of them all have a CSIRT, but CSIRT is not really that. To have a law on personal data protection is something completely different. But unless we have that, unless African countries together collectively we have that, we're gonna run into some obstacle because technology and human right and the personal data protection, particularly now in the COVID time, we are in COVID time, which we're trying to manage. Imagine 1 second that this becomes seasonal. What does that actually mean? It means government need to put a system in together to be able to trace its citizen in terms of pandemic breakout. How the law will treat that. I think that's that's really an interesting debate to talk about in the next 3 months in our area. Because even the UK having a problem with the law, France is having a problem with the law, United States of America, they're having a problem with the law.
Yeah, I think if anything, the coronavirus pandemic has exposed the sort of myths of exceptionalism, whether that's Western American, what have you. I think all societies are going to be confronting major questions during this period of time, and I think really causing some introspection in terms of, you know, whether that's questions of rights or, you know, public welfare, and sort of how do citizens of a society want to sort of mediate between those two big questions. You know, I think you're referring to the African Union, European Union Commission's Digital Economy Task Force, which we had the privilege to serve on together.
Yeah.
Your discussion points was precisely the need to establish an African-led, you know, an African-reflected, you know, privacy framework that was interoperable with the rest of the world. And I think in that respect, it's really a great opportunity to highlight the blueprint approach that Smart Africa takes in terms of understanding sort of what a best practice is in a particular country, and then working to extrapolate that best practice into a way that other governments can learn from. And then essentially you start to, you know, by virtue of this process, start to harmonize regulatory and legal frameworks in particular areas across the continent. I think particularly in the area of privacy, given, reflecting again on the conversation we were having earlier about startup acts, and of course, the exceptional work that the Senegalese government has done, really leading the way for drafting this startup act that was particularly inclusive and also particularly progressive in the sense that it also offered some tax reforms for all small businesses, not just startup specific support. But I'm curious if you see a role for sort of bottom up engagement and sort of more, you might call it deliberative sort of opportunities for ordinary people, for the users of these technologies to be able to come together and participate in these conversations about rights and how that might look sort of in combination with establishing blueprints and of course bringing in experts, because of course experts are important, and being able to bring in domain expertise, etc. But really, I'd like to ask you how you see the marriage of this bottom up.
Thanks very much for these questions. And whether we're talking about a Startup Act or whether we're talking about even let's talk about Startup Act, for example, for Smart Africa. That is a typical top-down approach. But for a real success of a top-down approach, there must be a bottom-up approach. As we've seen today we had over 40 people who logged in when we were presenting Actually Startup. You can see a lot of questions. We deal with the head of the state, with the board level. We deal with the steering committee, private sector level, and the minister. We deal with ICT council of ministers level. Yes. But how do you police the execution of, or how do you make sure the recommendations you put out there, it's actually executed? That's a fundamental question. And innovation, it's something, is like the world change in this life. Everything will change except the world change itself. The innovation does not wait. Very simple example, Safaricom of M-Pesa. If they had to wait for the regulatory body of Kenya to give them regulation, authorization to launch a mobile money, M-Pesa would have never seen life. Because innovation is driving. Innovation is driving the regulations. So when I talk about that, it means top-down approach, but the Startup Act, there has to be a bottom-up approach by all the dynamic and momentum that I for Policy is creating between incubators, accelerators, startup investors at the bottom level. Then the government will find himself faced with the pressure from the bottom and pressure from the top. Then they have to abide. Because innovation to drive in an economy, believe me, is not going to come by just sitting down. Think about it. Every single technology that we are dealing with today, did it have a regulation first, or innovation came and the regulation followed?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what Downs refers to as the pacing problem of technological innovation. You have this sort of incremental change of the legal frameworks, but this exponential change of technology innovation where the regulatory environment's always playing catch up, essentially.
Exactly.
Well,
so that's my take. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I think, and I appreciate you the reference to the sort of the for policy community. What I can tell you is that there are more than 200 community partners from across the continent that came on board in the last 2 weeks alone to be able to engage in this conversation. So there is a tremendous appetite from entrepreneurs, from hubs, from young people, from software developers from across the continent to be able to engage in these conversations. And what I think is so tremendous is that the mission of Smart Africa is so much aligned to the mission of a lot of the young people across the continent that are looking to create jobs, that are looking to create value for their communities. So I think it's been tremendous to be able to have you on this call today. I know that we're coming to the end of our 40 minutes that we had together with you. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Innovation for Policy Foundation. I know that we've started generating a lot of questions on the Facebook, and I would like to encourage everyone to please continue to follow up with Smart Africa through that startups@smartafrica.org email address. And we'll also be sharing the survey so that you can make sure that you are you can raise your hand and be counted by Smart Africa, and so they know who you are and know where you are, so they can try to find the best ways to be able to work with you. And I think we should all be staying tuned to hear the results of the crowdsourcing that you engaged in to be able to find solutions.
Yes, thank you very much, John, for having me.
It's really been our pleasure. Have a beautiful day, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us live.
Thank you. Bye-bye.